I'm Stephen Webb, I'm the Mayor of Truro. I've been living in Cornwall all my life. I moved to Truro late 70s with my mum when I was 9 years old, and I was homeless living in a caravan at the time. So I've seen the housing market from all levels, I think.
Hi, my name is Clinton Seeley. I sit on the Truro City Council. I've lived in Truro for about 12 years, over 12 years now. And I came down from London, so I've seen both sides of, what a vibrant town looks like, busy, multicultural. And I've come to Truro and it's kind of like, oh, hello. It's completely different. And it's just fitting in with your surroundings. So yeah, so although I'm not Cornish yet, I have adjusted to the Cornish way of life.
So the reason we're having this conversation is obviously because it's well known that there's a housing crisis within Cornwall. So in your opinions, what do you feel is driving that housing crisis?
Lack of houses, lack of affordable houses, lack of places to rent. But it's a mix of wages, low wages. You've got your income and you've got your expenses. When most of your money is going on your rent, take my daughter, 24 years old and professional, living with her partner, works full-time, professional, and they're living in Truro in a flat that's not that big, not that impressive, and they can barely afford their bills, and they haven't got a car to run, they haven't got, they haven't got children. They should be really having quite a cushion between what they're getting and what they're spending out. And they don't have an excess life, and there's the problem. You take in the 70s, your income was only a fraction of that went on your rent or your accommodation. So it's a mix of wages, lack of houses, inflation. It's not just one thing. There isn't a simple answer to it. That's the main thing as well.
Yeah, I endorse all those comments, but I think the problem is even deeper than that. We've just had discussions about this previously, but I think there's an absolute lack of joined up thinking when it comes to housing, and it's really frustrating. Everything has a cycle, and when we stopped building social housing or council housing, as the fashionable term is social housing, isn't it? I still say council housing. When we stopped building council houses, if we had that plan in place, if we had a 30, 40, 50-year plan, we would have seen this coming down the track. So every house that you take off the market is one less house available for people to rent or to buy. The other issue, in my opinion, is we've turned the housing sector into a profit-driven industry. A house is a place for people to live, it's a place for people to dwell, it's a place for people to thrive. And now it's become a profit-making industry. So we've got no regulations in place to stop people. You've got landlords at the moment who are turfing people out of their homes, what were their homes, and turning it into Airbnb because there's more money into it. And it's not a political conversation. It's a moral conversation. So I personally feel like if you've been renting a property for the last 10 years, you should be stopped. There should be a regulation put in place where they say, if that house was always a rentable accommodation, it shouldn't be turned into an Airbnb. 10,000 Airbnbs in Cornwall compared to 6 or 10 rented accommodation. We need to look at ourselves and say, what are we doing? It's just not the way forward. And for me, I've got a lovely home, but I can see the frustration that other people have. And when people sit down and look at it and they think, why as a country, we're the 5th or 6th richest country in the world, we don't have a plan to build houses for people. Personally, myself, what I would do, I would stop all building projects unless it's for social or council homes. And until we then have enough of those back on the market, then you can continue building these mansions, second homes where we live in Cornwall, second homes that are standing empty, that people are allowed to use as a tax break. It's ridiculous. And people don't like these conversations, but these are facts. You can just go online, do your research. It's nothing I'm saying is not out there to be seen. You need to have that connection. And with that connection, it comes with people's having mental health issues, as the mayor has said. You got a lack of income, so literally people are working just to pay for where they live. That's not how it's meant to be. Work is not meant to be like that, is it? Life is not meant to be that way. You shouldn't be giving more than 50% of your income to the private sector. And then to compound it all, as a council, right across the country, we are then putting private council tenants back into the hands of private investors, basically, for want of a better word. So it makes no sense. We've got temporary people living in temporary accommodation on campsites being paid over £1,200 a week. What are we doing? It absolutely makes no sense. So, as I said, I endorse everything you say, but I think there's a lot more layers on top of that we need to look at and address that balance.
You made an important point about Airbnbs.
Yeah.
And for probably, and because of Homes on the Hammer and programs like that, it's looked at it's no longer a home to live in and enjoy. It's a way of subsidising your income.
Yeah.
You know, year on year, if your house is going up by £10,000, you can get a loan, you can clear debts and all of that. So you got people with bigger mortgages and everything like that. And it's looked at as an income source. Yeah. And you cannot blame people when, you know, the quality of life is going down because everything's becoming more expensive. And that is going to get worse right now. So they're the problems. But what do we do about it? That's the big question.
Well, yeah, that's my sort of next question. Right, from the people I've been speaking to, you know, people who are suffering right now. You know, it's an immediate problem for so many people. There was a story just a few weeks back of an older couple, 76 and 84. One of them had dementia, lived in Cornwall their whole lives. Landlord decided to sell the property, and now they can't afford to live in Cornwall anymore. And it's just one of many stories. So I guess the question is, what is being done within council and stuff to address this issue, and not just in 5, 10, 15 years' time, but in the immediate sense?
I don't know if anybody's got an immediate answer. This is the problem, because it goes on to so many sectors now, and so many different, you know, we've got climate change, we've got all the other issues that need to be dealt with in the same way. One of the things in the Pydar development in Truro, which is a £170 million development, we're putting 320 flats. A lot of people that come back and go, well, where's the houses? Well, Truro has no flats to rent. Think about that for the minute. The capital of Cornwall has no flats to rent. That's terrifying. How are we going to get people to come back down here and all that to live after they've gone away and done training in university and all? When we've got a staff shortage anyway, we've got a workforce shortage. So we need flats. It comes down to we need to build. And I understand what people are saying, we need to build affordable, it has to be a mix between some on the open market, it has to be some that are rent affordable buying, but we have to make sure they're locked into so they don't go in there after a couple of years and then they sell it on the open market. It has to really be thought about. And the other thing is, it's really difficult to build easily affordable properties, because in order to do that, you've got to make choices. How much of the carbon footprint and all that, or the carbon ways in which you build these properties and in quality, how much of that are you going to sacrifice? You cannot just throw up properties, make them substandard, make them too small, no one wants to live in them, to make them affordable. On the other hand, these building companies and all that, and they're not the enemies. You know, they're there to make money. They have to answer to their shareholders. They're not in the business of building properties, they're in the business of making money. So we need them to build these properties. We cannot do it ourselves. So you've got that flip side of it, that you have to allow them to make profit on the other properties. So it's a balance between the two. I understand what Clinton's saying. You know, that'd be the ideal thing. Let's sort out the social housing right now. But I think it's a matter of balance. The biggest thing we need to do is start building and get on with it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I do agree that we need to, I understand your argument, and there is a flip side, because you always have to have a free market in order to make markets grow, you need to have a free market. But I think housing is a completely different sector. It's not, it shouldn't, and the reality is it obviously is a money-making business. But councils should reclaim some of the houses that they've got out there. The problem that I see it, there's so many layers to this. You've got association housing, you've got places like Home Choice. There's just so much that, and then when you look deeper into it, councils don't actually have any control over these properties. And you say, well, who's the property in charge of? Or is in charge of a private investor? And you kind of think, well, hold on a minute. To me, I put my money in a bank. And when I want my money, I go to the bank. The bank is the custodian of my money, right? I go to the bank. I ask for my money back. They've obviously made an interest on that, but I still see my income. With housing, we're paying out for houses, but the money's not coming back to the council. So again, it goes back to my first point. Until you have a joined up way of thinking about these things, if you're gonna have people renting accommodation from the council, that money has to come back into the council's coffers, and then they can then look after the properties that they've got, make them in livable conditions. Yeah. I was dealing with a case recently where this woman was put into a house that is rat infested, right? So there's rats in there. She had to go out to B&Q, buy the bait herself. Obviously the rats have died. They're behind the wall. Somebody came under the guise of their accounts, they're representing a council. She said, okay, so you've done that bit. Can you border up the property so no more, rodents, vermin can get in? Oh, sorry, that's not my job. The housing officer turned up, spent 10 minutes in the property and said, oh, I can't stay here any longer because of the smell. But then expected the family to go back in and spend the night in that house. They got moved then into a campsite, which I was alluding to earlier. So that money's coming from somewhere, isn't it? So the council's paying for her to go into a campsite without any return for that investment. And it's, yes, we need, we're all intelligent people. We need the private sector to boost our economy, but we also have a social and a moral responsibility to look after the people that fall through the net. I have friends from all different spectrums of the political cycle. And I've always said governments, regardless of what government's in charge, is to take care of people who fall through that net. Now, when you do that, to me, that's a failure of duty. When someone falls that far down through the net, we have no idea where they've dropped, and we have no answers to be able to deal with it. So to me, if I'm going to someone who's within that sector, it's all very well to say, we don't know how to deal with it. We should have the answers to deal with this. This is an issue that's been going on for probably 70 years plus. Yeah. People trace it back to Thatcher, but it probably went back before Margaret Thatcher times. And you can't heap the blame on one individual, but collectively we've had different governments in place, and every single person, in my opinion, has kind of looked at that as a problem too big to be dealt with. And we're currently in this situation that we've got now, where we've got people sleeping in tents, we've got people sleeping in lockups. Is this the Britain that we really want? Is this what we're proud of? Yeah. It's just not right. It's just not good enough. And I think we need to have a proper, mature debate about how we need to do this. We need to pull some of these services back into our control, the council's control. Right across the country, councils need to pull some of these services back into their control so they know what's happening. We need to have a real clear policy on second homes, so people with the income cannot just go. I mean, I live in Cornwall, you were born in Cornwall, you're passionate about Cornwall. We can't just have people buying up, and people will say I'm a hypocrite because I'm not from Cornwall, but you can't have people coming here just buying up second homes and leaving them standing empty for 6 to 8 months of the year, make a huge profit during the summer, and then the homes stand empty. And then we rest our heads comfortably at night saying, well, we're not dealing with the issue. We need to start dealing with the problem, because when you have a disease like we've got at the moment, it's only going to get worse unless we start fixing it. Yeah. Absolutely.
No, I completely agree. And the problem is it has a complete knock-on effect as well with the high streets. We're trying to rejuvenate the high streets. If you haven't got that disposable income, you're spending it out on things. So the more social housing, the more the housing associations and all that can build properties. But also when we build these estates like Langgarth and things like that, we need to make sure that it's got the school, it's got the infrastructure and things like that as well. And the problem is we're spending so much time going around the circles about not building on here and not building on there. You know, I do get it. We don't want to build in every single field. We don't want to, but everybody lives in a house today that was originally built on a field.
Yes.
You know, at the back of my house, we got a whole estate and that was a lovely valley at one point. You know, we cannot all have that thought of you cannot build in my backyard. You know, we have to start building at some point.
And we need to have a different way as well of how we look at how houses are built. Back in the 60s, right after the war, when we wanted to, you know, revitalize our economy, revitalize the country, people lived in towers. I'm not advocating for tower blocks because with a tower block comes its own problems. You know, if they're not managed right, if you put, you know, a lot of people with problem families, for whatever reason, not saying it's their fault, but together you get different issues. I used to, when I lived in Ealing, I lived behind on a council estate. I grew up on a council estate, so, you know, and we had various issues because it wasn't managed and maintained properly. But the way that we think about housing now, we need to change the way we think about these things. Everybody wants to live in a massive house. It's not the way forward. Sometimes we just might have to accept that we might have to build smaller, purpose-built houses for young couples coming along, for single people coming along. The divorce rate is going through the roof, isn't it? So you need more and more people need accommodation. We need students, you know. so we instead of having this mindset where people think I need a big rambling garden and I need, you know, a front and a back garden and place to park my car, and we need to think of the carbon footprint, we need to think to the environment. We need to look. We just need a complete rethink on the type of houses that are being built. And I'm not convinced that those conversations have been had.
I think the conversations have been had, but I think it is complicated and it's easy to look up and go, it's complicated, we're not sure what to do. We've got to make some commitments, and you put up second homes. And as much as I understand Cornwall Council and I agree that double taxing the second homes, I don't think that's going to make a difference. I think if you can buy a second home, I know it adds to a few coppers, but I don't think that's going to make any difference. But also, I don't blame anybody for selling a house at a second home. You know, if you can get more than £100,000 more for your home, I think it has to be put into the system and legislation. You cannot rely on us to do the moral right thing. And I'm not saying it's immoral to sell your home for a lot more money, but you can understand why people are doing it. And you can understand the frustration of people. I grew up on a council estate. I still live in a housing association house now. Yeah. You know, I'm lucky my rent is capped because it come in before they brought in the market rent. Yeah. You know, and I understand that brings in more money, but where does that money go? You know, when they sold the council houses in the 80s, it was supposed to go back into keeping the pot full for the housing, but it just wasn't. You know, I don't know of any councils at the moment that are actually building houses that are actually keeping them for themselves. We're doing it a bit with PIDAR, but that's still going to take 3 or 4 years. It isn't going to be overnight. So it does need top-down legislation. And the problem is, no government's going to come in and, you know, a government by nature, they've got to look after their voters in 4 years' time, and they've always got to think about that. So coming in and going, right, no more Airbnbs, no more second homes and things like that is political suicide. Yes, you know, so us sitting back and waiting for that to happen is just not going to happen, unfortunately. And I can understand. So to come up with the answer is to really, we just need to build. We need to really get on with it. But we've also got to be aware of climate. We've got to be aware of infrastructure and all of those other things. And, you know, sitting here, I'm just convincing myself that it's a really difficult job and I haven't got all the answers, you know. But there's a lot cleverer people out there than me. And I don't think we've got always the right people around the table to solve these problems.
You talked about regulation, and I think the onus shouldn't be on the individual. And I think this is, again, greed has overtaken that market. And you do need regulation in place. And if we had regulation in place, this would solve some of the issues that people have with low incomes. Because that market is spiking, and people follow the trend, don't they? So if I was renting a room, I mean, I'm morally stable, so I wouldn't do it. But I can understand why people would do it, because if there's nothing stopping them doing it. But I think regulation should be in place that it's up to a landlord how little he wants to charge, that's his choice. But up to a certain amount, there should be a cap on it. So if someone living in a room that's, 6 by 6, and someone's saying to you that's 700 quid, there's some ridiculous figures going about what people are charging for a room in someone's house. You're paying someone's mortgage. We need to have those regulations in place. And we've allowed that market to almost get out of control. And what frustrates me is when things go out of control, it's very easy then for all of us to say, oh, we don't have the answers. But the answers are there, aren't they? If we had the regulation in place in the first place, it would stem it.
Yeah. But the problem is bringing any regulation in when things are seen to be relatively good.
Yeah.
And even right now with everything that's going on, things are relatively good. It seems crazy to say that right now, but as a nation compared to other countries, we're doing okay. Now then, take in the mid to the noughties, if they brought in regulation on mortgages and all that at that point in 2006, before the housing crisis, if the then Labour government said, right, we're going to regulate mortgages, there would have been an uproar and they would have lost all power, and it would have just... So they almost wait till things break down so badly that they can bring in these things and go, well, we had no choice, we had to make the difficult decision.
I think you touched on it when you said it's political suicide. So the things that I'm arguing for are political suicide. Morally, they're right, and I don't think anyone can argue with it morally, but actually, it's if you're talking about career politics, then it is political suicide, isn't it? Because what you need then, what I'm saying basically, what you're almost part agreeing with, is you would need to have a government that's morally intact, wouldn't you, in order for these things to go through. Unfortunately, what we have is governments that are, well, you sort of think with the Pandora's box, didn't you? So what we have at the moment is we have governments who are career politicians, and actually it's about saying and doing the right thing. Nobody wants to say the wrong thing these days because it's there on tape and it's there for you to be questioned. But actually, I think if you're elected to represent people, the people that voted for you, then you should have a moral code then to say and do the right thing. And I can understand why people get turned off by politics, and I can understand why people get turned off by politicians, because you're sitting in a place and you're thinking, God, I'm in a dire situation. I'm trying to work for myself and for my family. I'm trying to maintain and do the right thing. I want to work. I want to pay my taxes. I want to be a good citizen. I want to stay inside the law. And then you see the greed and corruption that's out there. That's you can smell it a mile away. I really struggle to how people then don't go, why am I doing the right thing? When so much around me is wrong, why am I attempting to do the right thing?
So, we've just seen that universal credit is being cut by £80 a month, national insurance is going up, energy bills are going up, millions of people are essentially in a poverty-stricken situation. And in Cornwall alone, you're talking about 40,000 people who are affected by the UC cut. So what can you say to people who right now are facing all those hardships, as well as having nowhere to live? Because I appreciate, what you're talking about, complications and what we need to do. But those people who are right now on the brink, what can you say to them?
Do you know what? I don't know. Right now, it sucks. I'm sat here as the mayor of Truro, and having carers on universal credit, there isn't no encouragement to work more. The more they work, the less they get. They go over the 16 hours, and I cannot get them to do overtime because they lose so much money. They lose many other benefits. The energy bill's going up. it's the perfect storm for the poorest right now. And, you know, I tend to do a lot of motivational kind of talking and inspiration and all that. And I really don't know. And not only that, when you take away money like the universal credit, you're taking that away from the local shop, the high street, the local economy. And that's going to take away jobs. That's going to take. If you give a tax break to the rich, they leave it in the bank. When you give money to the poorest in society, they spend it because they need to spend it. They need that food. They need the, you know, and you know, I wish I had some words of wisdom. I really do wish, but I don't. And sitting here, I feel kind of bad. You know, the mayor's voluntary, and I'm on benefits myself. I didn't get the universal uptake because I cannot go on to universal credit because I'm on severe disablement premium. And I've struggled. You know,
I mean, I agree with what you said. I think for me, it's just a ball of frustration. I think in this country, we look at everything in isolation. And this is the major problem that we have. It's almost like we hold on to departments and we hold on to things like housing is a separate issue, mental health is a separate issue, employment is a separate issue, until we learn to understand that things are connected. So if you don't have a place to live, that's your mental health affected. That's probably your diet affected. All sorts of other things come off the back of that. So you know, as you said earlier, there are no easy answers, but we need to stop looking at things in isolation and realize that if someone's struggling with their rent or they're struggling with an employer that's not looking after them or paying them low wages, or people actually, like you just pointed out, don't want to work because they're trying to work and then they get penalized by the tax system that we've got. And when they do overtime, it does nothing for their income. Until we look at those issues, I think we're going to be having these conversations 10 years time. You know, we'll be sitting here having exactly the same conversation. We need to have that connection. We need to have departments talking to departments. We need to have some realistic measures to put in place to look after the people that are most vulnerable in our society. And, you know, to be honest with you, I can't see. We go to lots of meetings, don't we? And we know what we should do. And we have a passion to get it done. But there's so many blocks and there's so many barriers in your way to do things that should just be the right thing for you to do. And we seem to be drifting into this no man's space where nobody wants to put their head above the parapet and say, this is the right thing to do. Everyone's afraid to be called to account. And when I write letters, I call people to account because I personally want to be called to account. I know you want to be called to account. Absolutely. But we're in a minority. We're strong enough to be able to put ourselves out there to say, you know, come at us if we're not doing the right thing. But unfortunately, there's too many people who sit in positions of being able to do something, but they don't want to tick that box because if something goes wrong, they're held accountable for it. And we need to lose that and actually just get on with the jobs that people are employed to do. You know, as I said, I'm very fortunate. I know I'm very lucky, but that doesn't mean I don't have that sympathy and that empathy, that understanding and that passion to get it right. You've got that same passion, but I sometimes feel like, you know, we're climbing a very, very steep wall with very heavy boots. So in answer to your question, it's just that we need to collectively join forces. People need to not stop sitting on their hands. You know, I don't mean to be rude, but people need to stop sitting on their hands, understand the social struggle that's out there, and get out and do something. Get out and talk to your MPs, talk to your councillors. You know, make them be accountable for the positions that they're holding, and you know, don't feel it's okay to you know, 50, 70,000 people can turn up for a football match, but you get 200 people turn up to get their child into a new school or to buy books, you know, or to send their child to college or university, or to get just paid for the job that you do. You know, we need to take account for that. We need to hold those people in power to account. That's the only way you're going to get change.
Well, one thing I've learned in the last 3 years, more than anything else with COVID, is that it's not about money when it comes to governments. It's about priorities. There's been no money for the last 8 years up to 2018, 2019, but then suddenly there was money for the homeless. There was all this money suddenly come there. You know, governments make money out of debt. You know, there's no surprise why the debt ceiling is going up and things like that. You know, it comes down to priorities. And like you're saying, it is complex. You know, I'm learning quickly, you pull one lever and it moves other levers. But that's not an excuse not to pull that lever, to try something different. You know, and stick your head up and go, hey, look, I tried. I'm doing what I can. I might be wrong. I might not have the answers. But we need to try and do things rather than just keep talking about it, like what we're doing now, ironically. But yeah, and it's realizing what we can do from where we are. We're all in this together. And I don't like political slogans. I don't like things like that. But it doesn't feel like we are right now.